So have you ever heard of anyone reading, like, completely randomly?
Randomly.
Yeah, I know, right? Sounds a little chaotic, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
But that's how this one blogger, Allan, approaches his reading list. And, well, that's what we're diving into this week.
Oh, interesting.
We've got his blog post, a few of the books he talks about, even a scientific article, all about finding those unexpected gems,
Yeah, those hidden gems. I like it.
And what's interesting is that it's kind of like a direct pushback against how, algorithms and feeds
Oh, yeah.
curate everything for us.
Right, exactly. It's like he's purposely, stepping outside of that little bubble that they create.
Exactly. And he actually prefers it that way, especially for nonfiction, just kind of grabs whatever catches his eye at the library.
Wow. No bestseller list or anything.
No way. Not for this guy.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's a pretty interesting way to, to diversify what he's reading, what he's taking in.
Right.
I mean, he's way more likely to come across new perspectives, ideas that, wouldn't normally make it onto his radar.
Yeah, like stumbling into a bookstore you never knew existed, and there's that one book.
Right.
That just, like, completely changes
Totally.
everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And Allan actually gives us a few examples from his own random reading, and they're all over the place. There's Adam Grant's Hidden Potential.
Okay.
There's an article from Nature about something called, get this, AI model collapse.
AI model collapse.
Yeah, I know, right?
Sounds a little ominous.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, completely out of left field, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb.
Wow. Okay, so we've got self-improvement, we've got AI, we've got, like, financial theory. That's
Right. It's all over the place.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild mix.
But that's what makes it so interesting. There's this, like, common thread that ties all of them together.
Okay.
And it's got to do with something statisticians call the tails of a distribution.
The tales of a distribution.
Okay, I'm already getting flashbacks to high school math class.
Me too. Not all of them good.
Definitely not all good. So before we go any further, we got to break this down. What are these mysterious tales, and what do they have to do with reading?
All right, so imagine, like, a bunch of people standing in a line, right? And this line represents something that, we can measure about them. Let's say how many books they read in a year.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Most people are going to cluster around the middle, right? Reading an average number of books.
Makes sense.
But then you've got the outliers way out at either end of that line.
The folks who are reading, like, a book a day.
Right, or maybe they only read 1 or 2 books a year. Those are the tails, the less common occurrences.
Okay, so applying this to information, to ideas, the tails would be those things that are, like, outside the mainstream.
Exactly, the unconventional stuff. The stuff that most people aren't really thinking about or talking about.
And that's why Allan's random reading habit is so interesting. By embracing randomness, he's actively seeking out those tail ideas, right?
Exactly. He's going beyond what's popular, what's trendy, and finding those potentially really unique insights.
It's like, instead of listening to the same podcast everyone's raving about, he's taking a chance on that show with the weird name and a totally niche topic.
Which, to be fair, could be a total miss.
Totally. It might be way too out there, but maybe it's amazing.
Maybe it's brilliant, yeah.
Either way, it's something different.
That's where the real value is,
Yeah.
Exploring the fringes, challenging your assumptions, maybe even stumbling onto a perspective that totally changes how you see things.
Okay, you've officially piqued my curiosity. Let's unpack these examples Allan gave, starting with Hidden Potential. How does this book about, well, hitting potential tie into all of this? So let's talk about hidden potential then. How does a book, about finding your hidden potential, how does that even relate to this whole tales of a distribution thing?
Well, it's all about uncovering talents and abilities you didn't know you had, right?
Right.
Like that classic self-improvement thing. And to do that, they often use these, like, really inspiring stories.
Well, people who, like, already did it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where the tales come in. I mean, think about it. Those stories are usually about people who did something really extraordinary, right?
They're, like, the outliers, right? The ones who went above and beyond.
Totally. And this is where Allan brings up survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias. Okay, refresh my memory on that one.
It's like we focus on the successes of the people or things that survived to tell the tale, but we kind of forget about all the failures or those who, didn't make it.
Oh, right. It's like only reading about the athletes who won Olympic medals and completely forgetting about everyone else who trained just as hard but, didn't get to stand on that podium.
Exactly. It's really easy to see the winners and think, oh, it was their strategy, or they just had some special talent without really thinking about all the other factors, like maybe even just plain luck, or, all those other people who are also trying to get there.
Okay, so with hidden potential, would the survivorship bias be like, we're just focusing on those exceptional individuals who unlocked their hidden potential, like that astronaut, Jose Hernandez, that Alan mentioned?
Yeah, and he even talks about how Hernandez himself was like, yeah, I was in the right place at the right time. Like he recognizes that luck was a factor, you know. So
Uh,
so while it's inspiring to read those stories, we don't always get the full picture.
It's like, yeah, get inspired, learn from those success stories, but maybe don't beat yourself up if you don't become an astronaut or a tech billionaire, right?
Right. I mean, there's a lot that goes into those big success stories, things we can't always control, you know. It's a more I don't know, it's a more balanced way of thinking about it, I think.
Right, right, for sure. Okay, so that's hidden potential and survivorship bias. Ready to dive into this whole AI model collapse thing?
Oh yeah. Let's get a little more technical.
This one sounds pretty intense, even the name.
Yeah, this one really digs into those potential problems when we rely too much on AI-generated content.
Okay, so walk me through it. What exactly an AI model collapse?
So basically, it's what can happen when AI, especially those AIs that generate text or images,
Hmm.
when they're trained on data that's already been created by other AIs.
So instead of learning from the real world, it's like they're learning from like copies of copies.
Exactly. And what's kind of scary is that this can make the output, the stuff the AI creates, kind of worse over time. Less diverse, less nuanced. Remember those tales we talked about?
Yeah.
They can
We,
start to disappear.
wait, so if an AI is only being fed like pre-chewed data from other AIs, it's going to have a pretty limited view of like, well, everything, right?
Exactly. It's like that game of telephone we played as kids. The original message gets kind of distorted as it's passed along. Same idea here.
So worst case scenario, these AI models just become like parrots, right? Just repeating the same phrases and ideas, but not actually, creating anything new.
That's a good way to put it. And this article Alan read, they actually simulated this. They had these AIs just learn from each other generation after generation, no new real-world data. And what they found was, well, things went downhill pretty fast,
So the AI's output got like really repetitive.
basically. Like it lost that spark,
Yeah.
that unpredictable creative element that makes real-world information so interesting. Those tales, those outliers, they're important.
It's like we have to make sure these AIs are getting a balanced diet, right? Not just a narrow slice of pre-filtered information.
Exactly. Balance is key. And luckily, most of the time, these models are trained on a mix of real and synthetic data, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But it definitely highlights that we can't just blindly trust AI.
We still need to think critically about the information we're getting, even if it's coming from something as, complex as AI. Speaking of which, should we talk about that black swan in the room?
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about those unpredictable events. This is where it gets really interesting.
So we've talked about finding your hidden potential, dealing with survivorship bias, and even how AI models learn. And I gotta say, this whole time I've been thinking about that black swan idea.
Yeah, Taleb's book really gets you thinking about those unpredictable events, doesn't it?
It really does. And it seems like it connects to the tails idea, too.
Absolutely. Black swan events, those things we think could never happen, those are like the ultimate outliers,
Yeah.
way out there on the tail end of the probability curve. So improbable that we often don't even consider them until they happen.
It's like those this could never happen scenarios that somehow, actually happen. Like, what are the
Yeah.
chances?
Exactly. Like who could have predicted a global pandemic that basically shuts down the world? Or, that whole thing with the ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal. I mean, those are classic black swan events.
Mm.
Totally unexpected, huge impact. And they can come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and those black swan events really show you the limits of like our normal ways of thinking. It's like we try to force these square peg events into our nice, neat, predictable models of the world.
Right, exactly. Taleb talks about this thing called the ludic fallacy. It's basically when we try to take the rules of games, where you have clear odds and probabilities, and apply them to the real world, which is way more complex and chaotic.
So trying to figure out the stock market like it's a game of poker.
Exactly. It doesn't really work that way. Especially because those big risk management models, particularly in finance, they're usually built on this idea of a normal distribution, that bell curve, where
Mm.
most things cluster around the average.
Right, right.
But the real world, especially when you're talking about those high-impact events, it doesn't always play by those rules.
It's like we're so busy aiming for the bullseye, focusing on the most likely outcomes, that we completely forget there's a whole wall beyond the dartboard. And sometimes those random throws, those black swan events, Those are the ones that really shake things up.
And that's what makes them so hard to predict and so potentially disruptive.
So where does Allan, our randomness enthusiast, go with all of this? What's the takeaway for all of us?
Well, he pulls out some pretty important lessons from all these different books and articles. First off, he reminds us that whether it's self-help, AI, or even trying to predict the next black swan event, our models and theories, they're just representations.
Yeah.
They're not reality itself.
Right. It's like that old saying, the map is not the territory.
Exactly. And that leads right into Allan's next big point, critical thinking. Don't just accept everything you read or hear, even if it comes from an expert or a fancy algorithm.
Question everything.
Yes, ask questions. Look for evidence. Don't
Yeah.
be afraid to disagree. Think for yourself.
It's like we're not saying to throw out all models and theories, but we need to engage with them, thoughtfully. Be aware of their limitations.
Exactly. And that's actually what we're doing right now with Allan's blog post, right? We're taking his ideas seriously,
Yeah.
but also adding our own interpretations, making connections to other things we know.
Right. And that leads to his final point, which is about getting out of those echo chambers and finding different perspectives, right?
Yes. Because it's so easy to get stuck, reading the same authors, listening to the same podcasts, talking to people who already agree with us.
It's comfortable, but it doesn't really challenge us to grow, does it?
Exactly. And that's where, as Allan says, a little randomness can really help.
Randomness in what we read, who we talk to.
Our whole approach to learning, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Breaking free from those algorithms that try to keep us in a bubble of the familiar.
Step outside of that comfort zone. Pick up a book you'd never normally read. Have a conversation with someone who sees the world differently. You might be surprised what you discover.
Allan's onto something here. We live in a world that's obsessed with data and algorithms, where everything is curated for us. So being willing to embrace a little randomness, to be open to the unexpected, it's almost like a small act of rebellion, isn't it?
I like that. A little rebellion. It's about reclaiming that sense of curiosity, being open to being wrong, and recognizing that sometimes the most valuable ideas are the ones that make us stop and go, wait, what?
It's like that feeling of finding a hidden gem, a book, an article, a new idea. You didn't even know you were looking for it, but there it is, changing how you see things. And all it took was a little randomness to get you there. So, as you go about your week, we have a challenge for you. How can you bring a little more randomness into your own life? Maybe pick up a book you'd normally never read. Start a conversation with someone who has a completely different perspective.
You might even discover your own black swan idea, that unexpected insight that changes everything.
Until next time, stay curious.